Awesome. I also wanted to, and just to give some context for folks, this space actually came about after I was going through and writing an article on Medium with the same title as this space, called "The Future of Machine Learning and Why It Looks a Lot Like Julia." And in that article, I tried to point out a few of the high level points. So I think perhaps just to get the conversation started, I'll perhaps reiterate a few of those points and see if that spark some reactions from folks, and maybe people who perhaps don't think that Julia is well suited for the future of machine learning can chime in, because I'd be interested to hear those perspectives as well. One of the first points that folks oftentimes talk about when they're talking about, why Julia might be well suited for the future of machine learning, is that you get to use Julia at the core. I think there's sort of two different pieces of this. There's the actual machine learning tools that you use to solve some specific problem, and if you're in the Python ecosystem, that could be PiTorch, that could be TensorFlow, one of the other machine learning packages. In the context of Julia, it could be Flux for deep learning, it could be MLJ, one of the other packages. But so there's two pieces. There's those packages, and then there's the actual sort of infrastructure, the language that you're using to solve the problem. So again, in the case of Julia, we're using Julia to solve those problems, and that comes with a whole host of benefits in and of itself, independent of the sort of nuts and bolts machine learning mechanisms that you're going to use to solve the problem. I think that's one of the most compelling points that I've seen for folks when they're sort of making this argument as far as why you might want to use Julia for your machine learning workflow. You get sort of the out of the box performance speedups, and that comes in things like loading CSV files, and Julia can be 10 to 20x faster than it would normally be. Things like using dataframes.jl on large sort of sets of tabular data can be significantly faster than using pandas, for example, in the Python ecosystem. So those sort of things, again, it's not really, it's sort of part of the ecosystem, but it's not necessarily the nuts and bolts machine learning tasks, but it's worth considering as well. The other piece that is really interesting to think about is, again, if you've seen any sort of clickbait posts about machine learning in Julia, one of the cool things is that a lot of the machine learning packages in the Julia ecosystem, I would say actually all the machine learning packages in the Julia ecosystem are actually written in Julia itself, which is, you might think that that's not a big deal, but when we look in in the context of a language like or a framework like PyTorch or TensorFlow, those are really, Python wrappers sitting on top of a language like C++. And that introduces a whole host of complexity for you as a potential user or developer working on top of that package. And I often see the argument in the Julia ecosystem where, the line between a user of a package and a developer slash contributor to a package is very thin. It's a razor thin edge. If you sort of understand the nuts and bolts of how to use a package, you could actually probably look under the hood and make a contribution to that package itself. So I think it's something that's worth thinking about as far as choosing one of these two options. There's a few other points that I'll make, and I'll perhaps save those. There is someone who's requesting to speak. Agba, I'm interested to hear potentially if you have a question. We'll give you a second to connect. Agba, any questions that I can answer if you're fully connected?
Oh yes, I'm fully connected, but I do not have questions right now. So I'll just let you finish before I make my contributions.
Cool, got it. Thanks for tuning in. And again, if folks have questions or want to sort of make comments about some of the topics, feel free to request to speak, and I'll bring you up. I see a bunch of folks that I know in the space, so feel free to send in the request. Navdeep, did you have a question that I could answer for you?
Hello. Hi. One thing I would like to ask, maybe a bit silly to ask, but I want to know whether except Python, what type of algorithm can we try to apply in that?
Can you say it one more time for me, just so I can make sure I understand the question?
I'm talking about the type, the syntax, the language of syntax that we use Python. Which one language we can use except Python in machine learning?
Yeah, I think I understand the gist of what you're saying. So I think, again, from my perspective, Python is probably the most prevalent machine learning package at the moment. And that's, there's a lot of momentum and inertia behind it. I do think that there's a lot of interesting use cases for using Julia to solve some of these problems. And again, the way that I like to think about it, any problem that you can solve in the context of Python is also one that you could solve in the context of Julia. Whether or not it's worth the effort of going through the process of learning Julia, implementing the problem, really depends on the specific problem that you're solving. And Chris Rackauckus, and I'm not sure if folks have read this post, but Chris has a really awesome. If folks don't know Chris is an instructor at MIT. He's a director at Puma's AI and Julia Computing, and does a ton of stuff in the differential equations ecosystem, and has a blog called The Stochastic Lifestyle. And Chris wrote a blog post about the engineering trade-offs between TensorFlow, PiTorch, JAX, and Julia, and really at a deep level going into things like the way that automatic differentiation happens and all that stuff. So it's a really deeply technical blog post, but the gist of the blog post is that depending on the specific problem that you're trying to solve, Julia can potentially be really well suited to solve that problem. But in a lot of cases, it's at least the trend right now is it's only worth the effort in a lot of cases if you're solving something that's potentially in the boundary of scientific machine learning and traditional machine learning. And I invited Chris to come today, so hopefully he has a chance to come by and give his perspective. But yeah, I'm interested to hear. Simon, anything to add? Because I know you're in this space, and I've seen a lot of the interesting things that you're working on. So I would be interested to hear if you have any perspective on this.
Sure. So I actually just wanted to ask about process. So I mostly use Julia in my sort of academic side, and that's partly my main job is at Microsoft, and all the tooling for using cloud resources, and all my colleagues use PyTorch pretty much. And I just wanted to get your perspective because you're at Apple, right? Like,
Yeah.
sort of whether you use Julia just as a lone wolf, or whether there's sort of a community within your organization that allows you to get a foot in the door. Because once you've got that community there, then things start to take off.
Yeah, that's a great question, Simon. I would almost be interested in flipping it up the question on its head and asking you the same question, because I know that I've talked with a lot of folks who are on the Microsoft side using Julia for various projects. In the context of what I do at Apple, I don't use Julia, and I think the challenge for large organizations getting Julia adopted is you really need a killer use case. There has to be something where it's just clear as day that the impact of spending the time to get other folks up to speed on Julia is worth it. I think the challenge I have is, on my team, I'm probably the only person who uses Julia outside of work. And again, if there's, and Simon, you know this, large companies have so much infrastructure built around certain tools that it would be a huge ask for me to try to get folks to use Julia unless there was a 100x performance increase, which again might potentially be the case, but it really depends on the specific use case. So I haven't used it personally at work, but it's definitely something that I'm pushing for.
Yeah, I mean, the performance isn't always guaranteed. So, for example, Gaussian processes in Julia don't do as well as something like Stan, for example. And sometimes you don't really realize what the performance difference is until you've actually sat down and done the coding and done the profiling and so on. And I mean, I think that one of the killer apps in my view at least, is all of the differential equations framework. So for sort of modeling and simulation, that stuff is just leagues ahead of anything else in, MATLAB or Python or anything. And Chris has really sort of been very responsive to all of the little challenges that I've thrown down to try and get some of the more complex epidemiological models working. But it is really hard to sort of go against the inertia of frameworks like PiTorch.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I will note, though, that within Apple, and I don't have any material knowledge of this, but I've seen job postings specifically asking for Julia experience in the context of using some of those differential equation tools in the context of autonomous systems. So who knows what that could be used for? You can put on your Mac rumors hat and think about it, but it is being used in those contexts, just not in sort of, at least in my perspective, general machine learning workflows at this point.
Well, there are also some other nice things about it on the sort of company side, not to sort of dominate the conversation, but the fact that the whole stack is pretty much MIT licensed is really good. It allows us to use Julia in our products, but also it frees up anything that we want to open source. So the fact that there is this sort of fairly consistent license model, unlike Python, that's a bit mixed, and then totally unlike R, which is very GPL focused.
Yes, I mean, I'd be interested to hear, and I want to get to some of the other folks who have their hands up, but I'd be interested to hear whether or not that's like a trend that newer languages go through, that they start off with really MIT dominated licenses and then over time sort of transition to the GPL and some of the other ones that are out there. So I don't know the answer to that, but it'd be interesting to look into. Let's see. Krishnendu, I saw the hand up. Do you have a question that you want to ask?
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. This is a great forum right now. So I actually work in the healthcare ecosystem and the healthcare space, and I have worked with PiTorch. We are working with, like, my startup is one of the early implementation startup for Monai. Monai is the base for healthcare ecosystem. And one thing which I have seen, like, we worked with TensorFlow, JS, then we work with TensorFlow, we're working with PiTorch, whatever modules that are there in the healthcare. With Julia, we have something called Julia Health, which is being maintained. Now, my question is that how soon that will be evolved, because Julia is completely, this is built for high computation, that we all know. But when we look into different modules, and when I talk about different modules, let's talk about FHIR. If we talk about DICOM standards, right? It was very tough in TensorFlow, but it became very easy in PyTorch to create those kind of modules and everything. With Julia, we are seeing a lot of new construct around FHIR policies, implementation of FHIR, implementation of DICOM. So how do we grow this healthcare ecosystem? Do we create like what NVIDIA did with Monai and with PyTorch that created a different framework? And today, if we look into Makai or anything, we see that Monai is used as one of the topmost framework to build healthcare platforms, right? Which underlyingly use NVIDIA GPUs or CPUs as well. So how about Julia? So do we create a community or will it take a lot of time? Because I feel that this is one of the space that if we talk about one particular dimension, if we talk about one particular use case, going to be used in healthcare is going to be one of the biggest use case in the coming time. And Julia can really be a power play over there because high computation is really required. So yeah, any comments or inputs over there will be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And the piece that I'll note on the Julia Health organization on GitHub is that it was created by Dilem, and he is somebody who is doing an immense amount of work in the Julia community. And I have total faith that, you know, I think it's the chicken and the egg situation. I think in order to develop the tools that you're talking about and for them to become prevalent, there needs to be applications and there needs to be people who are interested in solving the problems using those tools. So I think companies like, for example, Puma's AI is a great, and you actually see this a lot of the, because, and this is just my perspective, because of the proximity of MIT to all of the health tech companies that are in Boston. That's really the startup scene in Boston is really around health tech companies. A lot of the early use cases and early adopters of Julia are those companies. So companies like Beacon Biosignal, which does EKG visualization and a bunch of interesting stuff. They're using Julia. Companies like Puma's AI, which again we talked about already, is
Exactly.
using Julia. So I think it's going to happen. It's just a question of getting more of those companies involved. And again, the epidemiological models. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but Simon's done some of that work. Lots of other folks in the Julia community have done a lot of that work using differential equations. So it'll definitely get there. I'm excited.
Thank you, Logan. So I'll
Yeah, of course.
just move back. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a great question. Let's ask Wen. Wen, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you, Logan, for this space of machine learning using Julia. Okay, my first question is, first of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Wen, working on that system, distributed acoustic sensing. I mainly work on programming, chip programming, and I basically use FPGA or Raspberry for machine learning, or maybe other convolutional network. Yeah. So, what my question is, for example, for me using using FPGA or a chip to make a machine learning or something like that, is it Julia? Is it possible to integrate or to import Julia to a microcontroller, or how to manage it with its library? Thank you.
Yeah, Wen, can you repeat just the very last part of that question? I think it cut out
Yeah,
on my end.
Yeah, I mean, is it possible to import library while using an microcontroller such as FPGA or Raspberry?
Yeah, so there's definitely ways to use Julia on, I know specifically the Raspberry Pi. I think is that what you're asking about?
Yes, is what I was asking about, because my last project was based on machine learning on Chinese plate recognition, yeah, something like that. And then I use Python to identify the plates of the car. So I'm asking if it's possible to use Julia instead of using maybe Python or something like that.
Yeah, it definitely seemed like it would be possible. I think it'd be interesting. I haven't used Julia on the Raspberry Pi or some of these other products before, but I know it's definitely possible, and I've seen some tutorials. So definitely worthwhile to look at and think about.
Okay, and how about the community? If, for example, have some problem, does Julia has have a community where people can get maybe answer, or in fact something like that?
This is a wonderful question, Wen, and I think the answer is 100% yes. A lot of folks that you see in the space right now are part of that Julia community. There's also a platform that we use called Discourse, discourse.julialang.org. You can post questions there. You can post them on Stack Overflow if that's easier to do for you. But it's available on both of those platforms. So definitely feel free to ask your questions. A very active community as well.
Oh, thank you so much. How can I get the link? Because I want to
I would just
use
check out
Julia. Okay,
julialang.org. Julialang.org
okay,
is probably the easiest way.
okay. Thank you. Let me Google it. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Yeah, of course, Wen. Great questions.
Okay.
Just to follow up on Wen's question, Julia works great on the Pi. It's really good. But for embedded stuff, you've really got to go to something like C. Even I think that MicroPython doesn't really cut it. But I think one of the things as well that perhaps one doesn't want to focus on this, because one of the strengths of Julia is its ability to have an ecosystem that's all written in Julia. But the language interop is really good. So you can communicate with R, Python, go down to C, or even like C++, which is notoriously difficult to interface with, far more easily than pretty much anything else.
Thanks, Simon. I appreciate that. And Chris Rakakis is telling me for embedded systems, I think you can use SynboxJL to generate code for microcontrollers. So I can't speak to whether or not that's true, but Chris is telling me to say it, so I'm sure it is. So definitely check out SynboxJL if you want to just Google that. You should be able to find everything you need there, and there's some tutorials. The Pythoner is the name of the account which has the hand up. Do you want to ask a question?
Hello, thank you, Logan, for this space. Thank you for everyone. I just have a simple question. Is it possible to import the libraries, the frameworks, and the toolkits that exist in Python in Julia?
Yeah, so this goes back to the point that Simon was just making with respect to interoperability. So Julia, in my opinion, has first-class support for interoperability. So you can directly import Python code, R code, Java, C, C++, all into a Julia file, and actually have the two pieces of code sort of together, Julia and whatever other language, and it works really well. I wrote a tutorial the other day on using some of Hugging Face, which is a platform to put your machine learning models using, and they have an API in Python, and I basically directly called the API using PyCall and was able to put Julia models up onto Hugging Face. So it works really well. It's super easy and convenient. So I definitely check it out. And again, for folks who might not be as familiar with the context, really the benefit that this allows is if you have some code that's written in Python or something like that, and you just can't let go of it because it's so good and you're so proud of it, that's fine. You can actually leave that code in whatever language it was in, and then just sort of leverage Julia for its benefits, and then also work with a language like Python when you have to. So it works really well.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, that's a great question. Agba, looks like you have another question, and then we'll go to the next one.
Thank you for hosting a kind of space like this. Actually, I'm just hearing of Julia for the first time. I've gone through their handle as well, and I think they are doing something pretty nice. So I just want to ask a question in terms of support scope, community, developer community, in case you're working on the project and you adopt Julia language. So what is the support scope like? Like, if you have issues with Python, I use Python mostly if I have projects like that too. I just want to ask questions that how is the support community like? Like, is there a group of dev, like, for example, Stack Overflow is there if you have issues with most Python issues, and so just asking, like, does Jumia have similar scope? So I just want to ask in terms of accessibility, in terms of improvement, in terms of speed, like is Julia doing anything better than Python? Like the difference, even if
Yeah,
it's just slight.
yes, to speak to the first point, I think I touched on it a little bit before, and there is first, the community is great. I think folks will help you with whatever the problems are, whether it's Stack Overflow or Discourse. I think that in general, the Julia community is actually more welcoming and more helpful than some of the other programming communities. If you ask a question on Stack Overflow about how to do whatever in Python or another language, people will just downvote your questions all the time and things like that. And that really doesn't happen in the context of Julia, which I find so good. Even if it's a beginner question, folks are generally really supportive. So highly suggest join the community, ask your questions. It'll be worth it. Kartiki.
Yeah. Thanks, Logan, for this space, and hello, everyone. And yeah, my more general question is towards Julia only. Is like that. Most of the space, even though I just exploring Julia in terms of, I know this of maybe you're working or maybe you started on that. Plus the like the it's again a Julia machine learning library. So you also explore about when we compare when MIT one is also explore towards the Julia in terms of Flux library, also TensorFlow and PyTorch. So if you go for the maybe comparison point of view, maybe on the terms of when we say how it's better in the industry and in terms of production, when we say because ML also right now is in very high boom. So what you see Flux in terms of in future. And my second question is more general to the Python comparison with Python. Even like I think so in Julia also there is some web frameworks around it. But when we compare with the frameworks with Python, how is the performance? And can you elaborate on the performance side also? Why we prefer maybe web frameworks for of Julia. And my third question that is very near to my heart because I'm working towards WebAssembly more on it. So, so is there anything like Julia community is thinking of the WebAssembly part? And these are my questions.
Yeah, these are great questions. So I think for the WebAssembly part, people are definitely working on it. I know Keno Fisher had been working on it. I think the folks who are doing Pluto development are now working on some of the WebAssembly stuff. Going to your second question, I think about the comparison between PyTorch and Flux, for example, in a production machine learning setting. I think the honest comparison really it depends on what specifically you're trying to do. If your goal is I need to solve this machine learning problem, it's a computer vision classification problem. The chances of Flux being better suited to solve that problem, again, it really depends on specifically what you're trying to solve. I think in general, the PyTorch and TensorFlow ecosystems are so big that there's an immense amount of resources. So when I do my day-to-day job and I try to find some resource and how to do something in PyTorch, the resource is there and it exists. In the context of Flux, that's not always the case. And that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges of using a language or using a framework specifically like Flux. You need to have some specific benefits or some specific use cases that you have in mind for it to be really worth it and worth spending the time doing. And I think your first question was about web development and the speed of Julia. I think there's probably from a speed perspective, I haven't explored the web development side at all. So I don't know if I have a good answer, but I know that there's some really interesting projects like Genie.jl. And I would perhaps actually ask that question on Discourse and see if folks have a good answer. People love doing benchmarks in the Julia community. So somebody probably has done a benchmark with Genie versus like Django, for example. So it'd be good to see what that is. I know you, Kartegi, I know you dropped off for a second. Does that hopefully answer the question for you? And you might actually be bugged out at the moment. Cool. Awesome. Shiva.
Yeah, thank you so much, Logan. So actually, my question was somewhat on the lines of what Karthike mentioned, and I just wanted to probably know in terms of run times, right? So today we are seeing again that sort of correlates to WebAssembly, but uh, when you're talking about some native code that we're writing in the browser that can be processed quite quickly, I'm quite aware that yes, on the basis of how Julia can also run natively in the browser, and the so would you want to probably just give a bit more light into the runtime environment and how that interacts with the browser?
Yeah, this is a good question. I don't know if I have a good answer. I think I'm not as up to date on the work that was being done. Chris was letting me know that the WASM work, WebAssembly stuff is not being worked on at the moment, but it was, and it wasn't in progress project that folks are working on. So I don't know if I have a good update on that, Shiva. I'm sorry.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Arturo, did you have an answer to that, or perhaps another question or point?
It's just another question. Hi, I'm a university professor at Mexico City, and I'm trying to get my students involved with Julia. And I also tell them that I also think that the future of machine learning is with Julia. But what the answer I get from them usually is, okay, but how far in the future? Because right now they see all the job postings about machine learning basically related to Python or to R. So I know it's a kind of a hard question, but they constantly ask me, but how far in the future? I mean, are we talking about 2 years, 5 years? So probably you guys that you have more idea of the growth of the Julia community and especially machine learning. How far in the future you think Julia will have, I don't know, how much percent of the total market share of the job postings? I mean, any idea that you can give me that could help my students to get more engaged and enthusiastic about Julia? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And I think the sad part is for me, I wish I could predict the future and tell you what it's going to be like. That would be awesome. The point that I always try to make when I'm speaking to students about what's the advantage to learning Julia in the machine learning community now versus learning Python or something like that, or using Python in your machine learning workflows. The big point that I like to drive home is twofold. One, the Julia community gives you, especially on the machine learning side, the opportunity to actually contribute something meaningful. Like in my own experience, I've had the chance to contribute to Flux and make a bunch of contributions that I don't think if I was just involved in the Python community, I would have been able to make those same contributions because the work has just already been done. The folks have ironed out those issues. There's less of an opportunity to do meaningful work because the barrier is a little bit higher. And the other piece is, again, in the context of students, you can use Julia and know Julia and potentially not necessarily have it end up being the thing that you use at your job, but it could still be useful in helping somebody get that job. I always try to make the argument that if you go into an interview and you sort of, I've had this happen to myself before, and you get the opportunity to tell people about Julia and describe the benefits and show them why it's a language that's worth using, even if you don't end up using it in that job, it's still, it makes you a unique candidate. And that's always the piece that I'm trying to tell. If you know Python and you know machine learning in Python, great. You're one of another, 50, 60 million other developers who know that. If you understand how to do machine learning in Julia, not only do those skills translate to Python, but it also, again, makes you a unique candidate.
Okay, nice ideas. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. Great question. And hopefully I'll be able to figure out how to use a crystal ball and and look into the future. Only if, again, the Julia community is growing quickly, so hopefully things continue to get a little bit better faster.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Great questions. I'm gonna accept some other folks to come up and ask questions. Give me one sec. Hey folks, just added a bunch of new people. So if you're interested in asking a question or adding a comment, feel free to raise your hand and I can. Martin, you want to ask a question? Martin, and then we'll go to Prince.
Yes. Hello. It's a very nice space. I have a question. Do you know any projects or any good companies which we can follow? You know, I'm just it's basically something like BCI or maybe an AI in general. Thanks.
Yeah, Martin, can you just repeat the last part of the question? I'm sorry, I was triple multitasking, adding people in, accepting messages. I apologize.
Sure. I'm just wondering if there is any big project which is written in Julia and it is worth following.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think one of the places that I love to go to find some of these interesting projects is actually the Julia Computing website. So Julia Computing is a company that the creators of the Julia language started, and they all work there, and they build products around Julia. And they have a really good case studies section of their website, and they go into a bunch of really interesting places that Julia has been used and showcase those places. So in the blog post that I wrote about the future of machine learning, I didn't actually go into those use cases, but I wrote about separately why you should invest in Julia as a data scientist, and I went into some of the use cases where folks are using machine learning. One of them was a company called Lake Tide, and they're actually using Julia because of its efficiency to do machine learning on device in some low power environment. So I don't know all the details, but I would highly suggest going to juliacomputing.com, checking out some of the use cases that they have on the website, and there's a ton of machine learning ones. So it would definitely be worth the time. Prince, did you still want to ask a question? Yeah, feel free to go.
Absolutely. Hi, Logan. Thank you very much. Actually, interesting topic here because late last year, I did a bit of a research on Julia. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Prince, and I'm a data scientist at Neptune AI, and we are a metadata store for MLOps. So we help people manage all the metadata from their machine learning model building process. So one of the parts that is like confusing or a bit unclear is like, is Julia mature and ready for deep learning? You know, I saw that I went through the Julia.
Prince, I think your audio is coming out, but I think I'm understanding the question you were asking, whether or not Julia is mature enough, ready for the spotlight of machine learning and such.
Deep learning in
Prince,
specific.
you still with us?
I know it's ready. It can do a lot of the
deep learning in specific.
Yes, can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a totally great question, and again, I'll something that I want to refer you to is Chris's blog post about the engineering trade-offs between some of these machine learning packages. I think Julia as an ecosystem is ready to do deep learning stuff. It really just depends on whether you'll see sort of potentially some speed or usability benefits specifically to your use case. So if you're doing something with that's sort of the intersection of a science domain and potentially deep learning, then I would say that it's you'll definitely see those benefits and it'll definitely be worth it. But again, if you're trying to do some more potentially generic machine learning things, the benefits might not be as clear or as fruitful right in the beginning for you.
Okay, so can I get up a little bit specific here? I want to talk, for example, about the memory management of Julia. So Julia uses a garbage collector, right? And according to
Yes.
a debate that was on the 3ML podcast, Chris Lattner pointed out that using garbage collector is not a really good idea because it may cause the memory not to be reduced in time. So this is, he points out that this is like problematic in the case of GPUs, since they don't have as much memory as CPU. I know that there's a workaround, but like, how is this going to be addressable? One of the questions that I would have next.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I don't know if I have a good answer to that. I think if you have a link to the post where I know Chris Lattner is he's a a very prominent figure in the machine learning space, specifically around ecosystems. If folks don't know, he was the individual who was going to lead I think he was leading the Swift for TensorFlow project, but he ultimately left, and that project seems like it's on hold a little bit. So Prince, I'd love to see that article if you want to send it over to me. I don't know if I have a good answer as far as the relationship between GPU performance and memory management, but it's an interesting question. If anyone
Just
else
send
has a
it
good
to you.
answer, awesome.
Just inboxed you that one.
Awesome.
Okay. I have just okay, no, I think that's fine. I had a couple of other questions, but I guess those are like really specific to like deep learning. But yeah, thank you very much. That was a big one for me.
Yeah, again, that makes a lot of sense, and I'd be interested to hear if anyone in the audience has a good answer for that. If you do, feel free to request to come up and give an answer for Prince. But thanks for the question. Just going to add a few other people. Interesting question that somebody sent me in my DMs, and they said, in the future, can we assume that because of its computational speed, Julia can be used for kernel level programming instead of C or C++? That is an interesting question, and that is also a question that I'm not sure if I have a good answer for. So if folks who I personally in my own programming journey don't do any low level stuff, because it's challenging and I don't enjoy it that much. So I'd be interested to hear if folks have an answer for that. Prince, do you wanted to comment?
Yeah, absolutely. So I remember I heard this debate or this podcast with Jeremy Howard, and he mentions that the future of deep learning is being able to go from high level till the lower level side of things. So there are projects like JAX and so many others. I think there was LLVM also. It's another project that is like looking forward to have bridged that gap where you can actually go do things like it quote unquote do something like CUDA, and also be able to go high level and play with the deep learning model, like the structure and everything. And if you have to optimize the lower level code, you can also go do that. And Julia, he points out that Julia and Swift were two projects that
Prince, I think we're losing your audio
what I
again. I'm
understand and know
sorry,
about.
the connection has been a bit spotty, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Where did you stop hearing me?
Just the last few words of the sentence.
So two projects that pretty much do exactly that, which is like high level, mid level, and lower level, meaning actually machine level code. It's like Julia and Swift. Although Swift has been it has gone to the graveyard, but those are two projects that Jeremy Howard pointed out that would be super crucial in the next couple of years, where you can play with high level model building, like something like PiTorch, and then if there's any optimization on the machine level, you can actually go there and fiddle with that if you have the expertise. And this kind of projects like Julia and Swift make it easier because they're not exactly like the machine level code programming languages. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer, and I think just to drive home one more point, I think this goes back to one of the questions about doing stuff on Raspberry Pis, and I think Symbolics.jl is also another one of the places where you could perhaps do some of this lower level stuff. Symbolics.jl has automatic conversion of Julia code into C functions, so that's an interesting project to look at if you're interested in potentially some of the lower level parts of Julia. Just going to head back over to my DMs and ask some other, check for other questions unless someone has one right now. Let me check. Yeah, Anton.
Yeah, how you guys doing? Yeah, I had a question. I seen the topic and I was interested. I was listening for a little bit, and my question particularly goes into using Julia. I see it's a compiled language, but I've seen some difference in between the G++ and the C-lang compiler and its optimization of code versus Julia. And from what I've seen, like the IRs and the optimization during compile time is actually better for C++ compilers as opposed to Julia compilers, and that probably could the previous question about kernels and writing hardware specific programs. I do write hardware level code as well, and particularly. The question I had was in the we're advancing into more ASICs, application specific integrated circuits for machine learning, and deploying like models on the edge and things like that. For example, like the edge TPU, it could do 2 tops trillion ops per second on I think like 100 some 2 watts of power or something like that, right? And from my personal opinion, I think that's where like embedded machine learning is going. I designed some of those circuits myself. These devices can run for a long time. You put a watchdog timer like the Texas Instrument TPL 511, cut off the power, and these devices could do AI computation on the edge without phoning home. I seen Julia's extension of C and different things like that, but my question would be, why not just write it pure in C? Because C++ has support for much of the APIs. For example, like the TensorFlow API, low-level API, the custom graph ops and things like that, most of the times are written in C. So why not just write it in C? Even if Julius, I know they use Fortran and C for some of their code, so why not just do it in that? Or if you're going to do accelerated computation, why not just go straight to CUDA or as opposed to using Julia? Or what's the difference between using a Python wrapper versus using Julia? Just from my understanding, because versus a data scientist, I'm not a data scientist. I use data science to train a model and optimize a model, but when it comes to like really fast computation for critical infrastructure, most of the time C++ or C is proven to ironclad to work for these. So that was my question.
Yeah, Anton, that's a great question. I think it brings up a great point. I think the questions and the points specifically that you raised are all interesting. I think as far as why you would want to use a language like Julia, instead of one of those other languages, given how C has such high performance, I think again it comes down to sort of what's the reason that Python as a language is so popular in general. It's because of the problems that you can solve, and because of how high level and easy to use it is. There's a reason 50% of all code in existence is written in Python. And I think in the context of a language like Julia, it bridges this gap. You want to solve these difficult problems. You want things to run quickly, but you also want, me personally, I would rather write slow code than have to write code in C or C++. I just don't want to do it. It's my personal preference. I don't enjoy programming in those languages, and I think you see that. You see that widely. I think, Julia as a language is one of the most loved languages. People enjoy programming in it. And I'm not sure that that's the case for C and C++, though I could be wrong. So really it's the efficiency from you as a developer that you get by using a high level language like Julia, which is the reason you would want to use it over a language like Python or a language like C. Hopefully that, Anton, I would suggest I know I'm sure you're busy doing lots of stuff, but I would try and get your hands dirty. And again, maybe it's just me coming from the, not having a deep background in C and C++, but I find it super cumbersome, and there's lots of little challenges when I try and build things in those languages that I don't run into when I'm using Julia to solve problems that are similar in scope.
Logan, you have a second?
Yeah, Mark, sure. You want to give a
Sure.
response?
Yeah. So I've been doing some things definitely in the low level with Julia. I think there's two things that are really impressive. One is there's two low level calls in Julia, LLVM call and C call. The latter allows you to call C routines directly. But the LLVM call, I think, is especially interesting because it allows you to submit LLVM IR directly to our compiler backend. And so, when I find I can't do something in Julia, often going to LLVM call is the answer. For example, the SymDJL or loop vectorization uses LLVM call to get to SymD primitives. And so often, if there's a feature that Julia is lacking, you could basically implement it still by going to that LLVM IR level, and you can usually still accomplish.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Mark. I totally agree.
I seen some of the LLVMR calls, but so similar code, but like the versions 6.0, for example, if you C versus a Julia function, there's different outputs and different optimization on it. So yeah, you can, but I think that there's some differences in how at compile time how it's translated, but yeah, good answer. And I do enjoy C code. I started real young, but some people don't, but I do. So to each his own.
I love that, Anton. I'm glad that you like it, and hopefully, hey, you know what? Give Julia a shot. We'll see whether or not you like it as much as C. I have a little feeling that you will. Vipul, you want to ask a question?
Yeah. So, adding to what Anton just said, I had one question that are there any conferences or any portal which churn out a lot of Julia from the research side of things? Because we see that we have got a lot of research paper from any new library, for example, JAX. So it has a backing from, let's say, Google Brain or something. So it forces the community to like pick that up. So do we have something like that in Julia? And the second question I wanted to ask was about the distributed training support in Julia, because the models which we have to train in PiTorch or something, we have to rely on a lot of other tools as well. For example, Ray is a new tool. So is there something like that in Julia? So that was my questions.
Yeah, Vipul, those are both great questions. So on the second question, as far as distributed training, the pieces are in place. I don't know if the project is production ready at the moment, but I believe that it's called Dagger Flux, and Dagger Flux is the package to do distributed training for Flux specifically, which is the deep learning library written in Julia. So that's definitely something to check out if you're interested in distributed training. And then to your first point, as far as As far as conferences, JuliaCon every year is probably the best place to see what folks are working on in the Julia community, but then also SciMLCon, the scientific machine learning community, which again, Chris Rakakis and I'm sure other folks in the audience are involved in. That conference is coming up in February, I believe. So you can go to scimlcon.org and find all the details. But yes, Julia is not backed by the folks at Google Brain, so we have to do all the hard work ourselves, and we don't have billions of dollars to throw at the problem. So it's interesting, and I think again from a lot of perspectives, I've heard folks talk about, those are some of the reasons they're actually interested in the machine learning pieces. The machine learning ecosystem in Julia is because a lot of it, isn't being run by Google and Facebook, which run all the two other sort of large open source machine learning packages. So something to think about, and those are both great questions, Vipul.
Yeah, thanks for your answer, and your last point really motivated me to look Julia seriously. So I'll do that, and I'm stepping down from the speaker panel. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Great questions. And again, I always just, I don't mean to poke at Facebook or Google or TensorFlow and PiTorch, but it's an open source organization is not necessarily that open source if it's run by a single institution at NumFocus, which is the organization behind Julia and some of these other projects. It's specifically one of the things that we look for when we accept new projects, which is that the contributors are spread across a diverse assortment of host institutions. And again, I'm sure there's lots of people contributing to TensorFlow and PyTorch outside of Facebook and Google, but it's always something to think about. I missed who had their hand up first, so I'm going to go to Emre. Hopefully I'm saying that right.
Hi, Logan. I am Imara.
Yeah. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to meet you too. I wanted just to ask about about the data community, like data analysts and the libraries they use for data manipulation and stuff like that, like pandas and NumPy and the visualization libraries. How it looks like in Julia, and also how what are the second question, what are the future projects of Julia about building libraries and improving?
Both great questions. With respect to the first one, as far as the libraries to do data science, I wrote a post called "Why You Should Invest in Julia Now as a Data Scientist." So that has a lot of the nuts and bolts, but at a high level, dataframes.jl, which is an amazing package, does all the similar stuff that Pandas does. And NumPy actually, a lot of the things that you do with NumPy are actually built into Julia itself. So there's not really a NumPy comparison, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong about that. But again, like things like multi-dimensional arrays and all those are sort of baked with first-class support into Julia, so that you don't have to use something like NumPy in order to do them. And the second point, the second question, will you just reiterate really quickly for me?
Yeah, I was asking about the future projects of Julia and the perspective for just taking out the machine learning community.
Yeah, future projects. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff happening. I'm not sure if I can give a robust high-level answer. What I would say is, if you hang out in the community for any amount of time, you start to see how many interesting and cool projects folks are actually working on. If you join the Slack community, there's a channel called New Packages Feed, and it's just a feed of all the new packages that are being registered every single day, and it's absolutely fascinating to see the stuff that folks are working on and the new projects that are coming about. So it gets me excited. If that's of interest to you, I think it's just New Packages Feed on Slack is the place to go. Great
Okay,
questions.
thank you.
Yeah, of course. Great questions. Deepak, you want to ask a question?
Hey Logan. So my question was, as a student, are there any internship opportunities for doing machine learning in Julia?
This is an excellent question, and it was something that I was hoping to be able to plug during this space, because I'm sure there's students who are interested in the same question, Deepak. So Google Summer of Code is probably the best place to get involved in the Julia community. So Julia as a umbrella organization hosts machine learning projects. Flux, which is the deep learning package in the Julia ecosystem, is also it's an affiliate project at NumFocus. So they might host projects through NumFocus. They might host projects through the Julia language. I'm not sure. So there's tons of opportunities. I would say the best thing that you can do now, if you're interested in sort of doing Google Summer of Code over the summer, is start making small contributions. I think the people who get selected, the dirty secret about Google Summer of Code is those who get selected are those who have sort of been hanging out in the community, making contributions all the while. So start making those contributions as soon as possible, and you'll definitely see the opportunities. Tons of other companies as well. Invinia is a company that's hiring folks, and I've seen machine learning stuff in the Julia space. Puma's Julia Computing, Beacon Biosignal is doing machine learning stuff for EKG viewers. So there's a bunch of different job forums and a bunch of different opportunities for students.
All right,
it's a great question, Deepak.
All right, thanks a lot, Logan. And I would like to ask one more. I would like to ask one more question. So we have seen Julia prosper a lot in fields like machine learning and data science. So what's next for Julia? Where else would it have a lot of potential, let's say 10 years down the road?
Yeah, another fascinating question. I think probably in the biological sciences space, I would guess there's going to be a lot of work. You've seen some of the first steps in that direction happening. There was a really good paper that got published late last year about using Julia for biology and some of the benefits that it provides with a bunch of the folks in the Julia community. So I would see it in that space. I think the Genie.jl project, which is again similar to Django, will be really interesting. That's actually, if you're interested in deploying machine learning models, Genie is a great way to deploy your Julia machine learning models. So there's potentially a lot of cool things that could happen in that area as well.
Thanks a lot, Logan, and yeah, I'll be signing off the speaker stage right now.
Cool. Thanks for the question. Parth, you want to send in a question?
Sure. So I am a student, and I'm a student researcher in machine learning at my college here, and we are looking at how we can use Julia for our projects. And I was wondering if there is any analog to frameworks like PiTorch Geometric for developing geometric deep learning architectures and all the equivariant neural architectures. I'm not sure if you are aware of the research that comes out of Max Welling's lab in Amsterdam or Michael Bronstein's lab at UCL, which are focused on developing geometric deep learning stuff. So are there any analogs to like PyTorch Geometric, which is one framework that I'm aware of? Is there anything in Julia as such in development?
That is a really good question. I'm actually just I don't know anything about deep learning in the like geometric space, if you will. I'm trying to do a quick Google and see. Mark, you have an answer for that?
Yeah, there is a geometric Flux.jl, which does geometric deep learning in the Flux framework.
I just pulled that up as well. I'm glad I did a quick Google. Yeah, that's definitely something that you might want to take a look at, and I'd be interested to see, Parth. You know, I don't know all the trade-offs off the top of my head, but this looks like it's a pretty robust package that's been around for a while. So it might be something that's worth looking at. It's if you just Google geometric flux.jl, it seems like it could be of interest.
Sure, thanks. I'm sorry. How I've not looked this up already. I think I should check this out myself. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
And there's also a big project on it too. So you can also check out, there is a project on geometric. deep learning with Julia.
Interesting, Prince. What is the project? I actually don't know.
I forgot. I think I can only get to it because this I found out in my research. I can only get it and then tweet it at him.
Yeah, no worries. That's interesting. Saurabh, hopefully I'm saying that right.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Saurabh. And my question is, what is the state of adoption of Julia among corporate players like Azure? As I've seen the development of PiTorch, it got famous within the researchers first, then the hobbyist, and now it's well accepted in the industry. So what is the plan for adoption of Julia language? And I also saw that Kaggle did a recent survey where they literally skipped Julia language as one of the most popular languages for data science. So do you think this would be a challenge for Julia project to, stand against this industry giants like TensorFlow and PyTorch? Thank you.
Yeah, this is again an interesting question, and I think the way that I see it is the places that Julia will accelerate are the places where it does not have to directly compete against things like PyTorch and TensorFlow. Again, there's so much money, there's so much institutional backing behind those packages that it's really difficult to even think about or want to compete with them. So again, I see the growth for Julia coming in places where it's not in direct competition to packages like those, and it can really find these niches like geometric flux is something that I'm sure is state of the art and very interesting. And again, you see this in the spaces of there's neural flux and all these other like the combination of neural ODEs, ordinary differential equations, and flux, and spaces like that where the basically the scientific machine learning ecosystem is where I think a lot of the growth will come. And then hopefully over time, some of the other packages will mature to the point where folks want to use them instead of something like PyTorch or TensorFlow.
Okay, but we do have, let's talk about Hugging Face. Now, their repositories are full of TensorFlow and PyTorch, right? And if I have a developer who just codes in Julia and there are no packages or no models available, then the problems that he faces would be, he needs to develop that package either from scratch or maybe switch to other programming language. So don't you think that is a challenge that popular libraries like Hugging Face are not, coming up with Julia language as the third offering in their model repository?
Yeah, I think that's totally a fair point, and I definitely think it's a challenge. I mean, the reality is that the organizations have to think that there's actual users of the language and of the packages and of the ecosystem for it to be worth it. And my guess is, the percentage of Julia developers that are doing stuff on Hugging Face is probably quite small right now. I do think that there's a big opportunity to be able to basically use PyTorch models and TensorFlow models in Julia, and I don't think you can do that right now. So it's definitely an area of interest and where work needs to be done. So I totally agree. Mark, did you have a response to that? If not, if it's just another question, then I'll go to Scott.
Yeah, I think it is somewhat related. There's a torch.jl. Basically, for something like PyTorch, you do have to create CUDA or C kernels, and we've made those available in Julia through Flux. So I think there's some ability.
Mark, we might have lost you right there, but that is 100% true. There's torch.jl, which is PyTorch and Julia created by someone who now works at Google, but it's an interesting package, so would definitely check it out if you're interested in doing that. Scott, I'm going to go to your question next.
All right. Good morning there. So I had Yeah, so thank you for putting this on. First time participating in one of these, so this is great. Most of my background is in using the R programming languages with a little bit of Python. So Julia is one of those languages that I've experimented and played with a bit since like version I think 6.5, but really started to play with it a lot more since it got to the 1.0 version because I felt a lot more confident playing with a language that didn't have too many breaking changes. So given Julia's a lot younger, so to speak, normally in like R or Python, I'm using packages that have been proven to be robust, like they've been developed for many years. A lot of the bugs have been fixed out. You can be fairly certain of the reliability of the results. My question related to Julia is that and I guess any programming languages packages, when you're searching for a tool like say a new package in the language and you find one, but it's like very new, like version 0.1, 0.2, something like that, like very, very young. How do you develop confidence and trust in the results of of that package that are generated? Like say I'm doing a sort of, I don't have any particular package like in my mind here, but say I'm doing some sort of like time series analysis. And the only package I can find in Julia that does what I need to do is like in version 0.2. So it's only been out for, say, a few months. What types of things would you look for in newly developed or released packages that would help you develop trust in the type of results they generate?
This is a great question, and I think that it's something that you probably will commonly see across the Julia ecosystem. One, folks aren't super interested in sort of spinning out the new versions of packages. Like something could be production ready and completely robust, and they could be at version 0.1. I think that's just because of the nature of how new the Julia community is. But what I will say is the things that I look for personally when I'm sort of evaluating packages probably apply broadly across all of the open source ecosystem, not specifically Julia, but I look for packages that are being developed by people who I know in the community, packages that are part of actual GitHub organizations, not just run by a solo maintainer, because then ideally if that person decides to move on, other people have access to the code, and then other things like documentation and usability, pieces like that. I'm not generally, and maybe it's something that I should think about, I'm not generally thinking about, hey, I see this package, it does what I need it to do, but is it actually working correctly under the hood? Most of the time I have like an implicit assumption that things will work, and maybe that's not always true, but it's definitely sort of the way that I operate, at least.
All right. Thank you very much for those pointers there.
Yeah, of course. Sorry, just responding to a message, folks. If you're listening to this space on the web, I believe that if you want to request to speak, you have to be using a mobile client. I don't think you can do that from the web. So if you have Android or iOS and you have the Twitter app downloaded, which isn't a good idea, don't download Twitter. Then you should be able to request to speak. Just going to answer really quickly a question that came through in my DMs about using Julia. The person said, "Hi, I'm a statistician and an R instructor. The department that this person works at, they teach lots of math and machine learning courses, and they're trying to shift away from MATLAB. Some people are advocating for Julia, like this person is, but they're unsure about the ease of setup on different systems from the perspective of an instructor. With R, you don't really need to spend too much time fixing setups on different versions of Windows and Mac OS. And how's the experience with Julia? And also, what's the most used editor?" So this is a great question. I think, from my perspective, one of the things I love most about Julia is how easy it is to set up in a new computer. Literally just download it. It works when you open it up. You don't have any problems. If you want to add it to the command line, that's also super easy. The instructions are on the Julia website. So that generally should be super straightforward. And Julia is widely supported across a ton of different operating systems and such. As far as the most used editor, people use VS Code. It's the sort of official editor of the Julia language, if you will. So I would check out VS Code. Arturo, you want to add on to that?
Yes, well, I was R user for more than 20 years. I started using R since almost the beginning, and I jumped to Julia about two years ago. And as a statistician, I really don't feel a big problem about installing Julia. It's very easy to install the basic kernel, and even using either VS Code or Pluto notebooks. Pluto notebooks are wonderful. If you are used to Jupyter notebooks, well, I prefer Pluto notebooks because it's a package completely written in Julia and it's reactive notebook. So that's what I'm being using, especially for my classes, for my students. Pluto notebooks are awesome, very easy to use, and you can generate very nice documents. So I think that that's not a problem anymore.
Yeah, totally. Huge plus one to that. I would also suggest, again, if folks aren't familiar with Pluto.jl and the Pluto ecosystem, definitely something to look at as far as it's very similar to Jupyter Notebooks, except the cells are reactive. So if you make a change at the top of the cell or at the bottom, for example, it'll regenerate all of the results. And again, just like you can with Jupyter Notebooks, you can actually embed some of these things into web pages. So if you want to see a good example of this in production, computationalthinking.mit.edu has a bunch of these notebooks actually built into the website, which is super cool. So definitely something to check out. I'm going to answer another question via the DMs, and then perhaps one other question from the speakers, and then I actually have to run. I have another meeting I have to go to, so apologies. But the questions have been awesome so far. The question is about whether or not Python, or this person is saying Python has a standard model exchange framework, Onyx. Julia has a fork of it, but it's still in development. Are there any alternatives to using Onyx? And again, if folks aren't familiar, Onyx lets you basically standardize the format of your machine learning models so that they can be used by people regardless of what machine learning package they're using. So Julia definitely has a version of this. There's onyx.jl, and then there's also another version of this, which I forget the name of, but is being created by someone named Dr. Chainsaw, which is a is an awesome GitHub username, and I forgot what the name of the other version is, but there's another Onyx version. If you just Google Onyx Julia, you should be able to find that. I think they're both sort of operational, and there's both in both cases there's lots of work that's being done to help to get those to a production ready position. And we'll go ahead and answer one other question. Batardish?
Sorry, can you hear me fine?
Yeah.
It's not a question so much, it's more of an observation that I've had. I'm a bit of background on myself. I'm a student for the Open University. I study mathematics, but I'm really focusing on statistics and machine learning. So this has been a really interesting topic for me to listen to. My experience with Julia has been with low-end machines. So when I say low-end, I've used it on a Pentium machine that would have been E-Waste. So this was a Pentium Gold laptop that would have been E-Waste. And I've used it on a Raspberry Pi 400. That's the all-in-one Raspberry Pi computer, and a Raspberry Pi 4. The one thing that I've noticed with all of them when I've done my explorations in mathematics and statistics is that it has always been consistently faster on these older end machines compared to Python. And I've been waiting a while. I know there's a few people that have spoken about using Julia on these older machines, these lower spec machines, and I've been waiting to try and get in, but I've been cooking a meal for myself, so I apologise for that. But I just wanted to comment on how quick these Julia programs are on these machines like the Raspberry Pi 400, the Pentium Golds, and so forth, compared to Python. Now, Python, I really do like Python. I think it's a great language. Um, and I use it a lot for other things, but for raw computational things, I think Julia is far, far better at running. And as for portability, I've not had any problems putting it on any machine that I've got. So I've got a, what is it? I've got a Ryzen 5 machine, runs perfectly on that, runs perfectly in the Pi 400 and other things. And that's all I just wanted to say to other people that are listening, that if you do have these lower end machines and you're thinking about using Julia for your explorations in statistics, machine learning, or anything else, I've had no problems running it on all these lower machines. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a great point to bring up, and I think you know, folks perhaps sometimes take for granted, you know, everyone, you know, I'd say everyone, a lot of people are doing development on like MacBook Pros that are really expensive and have, you know, amazing processors, and I think you know, there's a huge portion of the world that isn't using those products, so I think having a language that works well. Regardless of what computer type you're using, is awesome. So I love that. I love that call out, and hopefully, if other folks are in the similar position and you know don't have beefy GPUs and don't have really expensive computers, you can still leverage Julia and see benefits from its speed.
What I should also say is I'm a mature student, so I'm nearly 40. I can't afford a great big machine on a student loan. So for me, a Raspberry Pi 400 is, you know, I have to pay for it out of my wages. So a Raspberry Pi 400 with Julia and Python, I do all the computational stuff using Julia and then shunt it over to Python to do anything that I need that Julia, I either don't know how to do in Julia programming or I don't think Julia could do right at the minute.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for the input and perspective. Vanshika.
Hi, Logan. Thanks for the invite. So first of all, thanks for hosting this space because it's very important. I was not resonating with any of the machine learning space ever. So first of all, who don't know me, this is Vanshika. I am from India. I'm currently working as a data scientist at Fractal Analytics. Those who don't know about Fractal, it's a prominent player in artificial intelligence. Recently became unicorn, and it's a multinational artificial intelligence company that provides services in CPG, insurance, healthcare, retail, finance sector. Like our main vision is to empower every human decision in the enterprise. We have products like Eugene AI that provides unscheduled downtimes. AI frameworks for operational reliability. Then we have Cure AI to read the head CT scans and find abnormalities. So we actually work on real life use cases. And I think I want to answer one of the question of I think Parth was there who asked the question regarding like someone, I think not Parth, but someone was asking for deep learning model and computing library. So there is MXNet, which is used for computing, especially in cores and GPUs. In short, like this library is used for efficient GPU computing. And there was one more person who were asking about data structure visualization, all those libraries. So for data structures, you can use NumPy, SciPy, Pandas. For visualization, Matplotlib, Seaborn, and Plotly. For development, you can use tkinter, Flash, Django. For AI/ML algorithm, you can use scikit-learn, TensorFlow, Keras. And a lot of people, what they do is they just directly jump into data pre-processing. But don't do that. Make sure you understand the data very well. Like what I used to approach is a crisp TM model, which is a 6 framework model. Number one is business understanding. Understand what does the business need. Second was data understanding. What data do we have? Or, is it clean or not? Then we have data preparation. Like how do we organize the data for modeling? Then fourth was modeling. What modeling techniques we should apply, the efficient ones. And fifth was evaluation. Which model best meets the business objective. And sixth was deployment. How do stakeholders access the result? And when you are working with the data, please make sure that know the problem statement or the business objective very well, because a problem well known is a problem half solved. Make sure you understand the business objective very well, load and view the given data, and check the relevance of the data against objective or a goal to be achieved, like scope of the data, time relevance of the data, quantum of the data, features of the data, because that would help you a lot after when you reach out to your pre-processing journey. Understand each feature in the data with the help of data dictionary, know the central tendency and data distribution of each feature, because these are the key features which people generally miss out. So make sure, don't hurry. It's a long journey. Just take us a single step at a time. And those who were struggling with machine learning, make sure you are very depth with supervised and supervised learning. Supervised includes regression, classification, like and unsupervised clustering, dimensionally reduction, association, rule learning. So make sure you're very well versed with all the algorithms prior to diving into the journey of modeling. So that's all I wanted to add. I hope that answers the question of that one person who was asking about computing library. So it is MXNet. So that's all. Thank you, Logan, for inviting me once again.
Yeah, of course. I think we should probably have some spaces just talking about some of the interesting best practices and getting started in machine learning. I think that would be interested to just hear some of the resources across.
Looking for some rooms like which host data science room, but there was none on Twitter. So let's make a Twitter community on machine learning or data science basically, so that we all can empower each other. Because I was looking for this, but I didn't find any of the community on Twitter which actually talk about machine learning stuff. So I'm totally inclined towards it, and I'm up for it to create a community and host spaces such like that. So let's
Yeah, I
host
think
it. Yeah.
it'd be interesting to see perspectives from I know a few folks were talking about R earlier. I think it'd be interesting to hear perspectives from the R folks doing machine learning stuff and Python as well. But I have to drop off, and I'm already a couple minutes late for my next meeting. So it was great to hear perspectives from everybody. It was awesome to hear what folks had to say. I know there's a bunch of questions that people sent via DMs that I didn't get a chance to answer, so I'll try to send folks links and get responses individually. But thanks everyone for tuning in. If there's questions, feel free to send something to me, and stay safe and well, and I'll talk to you all later. See ya.